A very warm welcome to one and all present here, parents as well as students, my dear friends. I don't know how many of you all know me, but I am Mayur Ahuja, the founder of Pune Model United Nations. And I'm really very happy to have you here for the first training session of Pune Model UN. First of all, I would like to congratulate all of you because you all are a part of Pune's largest youth conference with over 620 delegates. Can we have a round of applause, please? Now I'm just going to share a short story with you. This was when we were planning to have Pune Model UN, the inception of Pune Model UN. Me and Rudranil, he's the Secretary General for Pune Model United Nations, and he will be taking the training session forward. But when me and Rudranil were starting with the inception of Pune Model UN, there were many questions as to how do we go about whether we will be successful in what we are doing. And I remember Rudranil told me one thing: we will be very successful. I said, why? He said, we will be the first MUN in India to follow the UN procedure. And these words inspired me to start the Pune Model UN. And it's all thanks to you and my organizing council who's made this happen. I have organized many MUN conferences before, but this has been my biggest and closest to my heart. So I thank you all as well as my organizing council for making this so huge and so big. Now I would like to hand it over to Rudranil. It's going to be a long session and he is not boring at all. So, Rudranil.
For your wonderful star-filled introduction. Basically, I'm over here today to give you a one-sided discourse. As you're aware that we have another training session on the 14th of January, 14th of December that is, and that would be something which is more interactive in nature. Now, why we are organizing these training sessions is to give you an idea about what the United Nations is, what is a Model United Nations conference, and why should you be over here investing your time, your energy, your research skills, leaving your studies apart, and trying to do something which you are trying your hand at for the first time. Very shortly, allow me to present my background to you, because primarily you would be interested to know as to why, leaving anybody else, I might be over here to address you for the conference. Apart from being the Secretary General of the Pune Model UN Conference, I am a student of law at the ILS Law College in Pune. This is my 4th year of legal studies, and I have started doing Model UN conferences from the year 2003. So technically this is the 10th year in which I have been doing Model UN conferences until. The credit for inducing this interest in the Model United Nations concept is to be solely given to my school, which was Ryan International School, and I had participated in the Indian Model UN conference for the first time in New Delhi, and from there on, in these past 10 years, we have attended more than 30 MUN conferences in various roles and capacities. One of the most interesting points in my life was when I applied to the United Nations to participate in their MUN conference called the Global Model United Nations Conference. That was a blind try. I didn't expect that my application would go through, honestly, because it involved me writing a research paper, fielding myself against approximately 1,000 other students in order to get selected for the final 500 delegates who would be representing various countries in the MUN conference. This happened in South Korea. Somehow, through the application process, I did get selected, and at the Global MUN conference in South Korea, the procedure that was followed was not what you would find in any MUN conference, but that was the actual UN procedure. And that gave me a firm idea as to how the proceedings of the United Nations are actually conducted. And thereon, it actually changed my idea of doing MUN conferences in the past 8 years back then. And there has been a new era in Model UN conferences which has been brought up by the UN through the Global MUN. And in this conference, Pune Model UN 2014, we would be trying to simulate the United Nations in the closest way possible by adopting the procedure of the UN itself. Now you must be wondering that if it is a Model UN conference, then isn't it true that every MUN conference will actually have the procedure of the UN? But that is not true. The concept of, or rather the idea of doing a model international organization dates back to the 1920s when Harvard had started with the concept of Model League of Nations back then. And from there on, after the failure of the League of Nations, the UN was formed in 1945, and then Harvard took it upon itself to start the Model UN concept. So basically the procedure that we generally follow in MUN conferences is that which is set up by the Harvard University in US. There are various other procedures which have been modified as per the organization's taste, and they have been called as the Hague International MUN procedure, which is also called Taiwan. The Harvard MUN procedure does exist. There is a Harvard National Model UN procedure, which is for collegiate students. There is also a procedure called the UNA USA, which is the United Nations Association of the USA. And there are various other procedures which many different organizations have tried to formulate and simulate, but none of these are the procedure of the actual UN. The actual United Nations has very less procedural aspects, because when you try to think about the UN in itself, you will realize that there are heads of states, there are ministers, there are foreign secretaries, there are officials of the highest level of diplomacy who come there in order to put forth their country's perspective. If there is too much procedure involved in it, then the exchange of ideas and the exchange of foreign policy, the understanding of international negotiation may get hampered up to a great extent. And therefore the procedure is very flexible and is also set by the organization itself in every session that we begin with. So before we go into the procedural aspects of the United Nations and Pune MUN as a conference in itself, I would like you to understand and appreciate as to what the United Nations is as an organization. Before that, I would just like to understand as to how many of you have attended Model UN conferences in the past. A show of hand will do. Roughly 10 students out here? Alright. And how many of you know about the United Nations and have an interest towards this organization? I'm sure that majority of you would be studying the subject through your civics course, and I'm glad that so many of you have interest towards the UN as well. So understanding it, that as to, have you ever tried to question why the United Nations even came into being? We would require the mic right here for you if somebody wishes to explain as to why you thought or why do you think that the UN has come into existence. Yes, ma'am.
After the two world wars, after the first World War, the League of Nations was established, but it failed to prevent the Second World War. So then after the World War II, the United Nations was established.
So we get from this that there was World War I, post which there was an organization called the League of Nations. which also failed to maintain international peace, and thereby came the World War II, followed by which the UN was established. So let's go one step behind and understand why did the League of Nations come into existence in the year 1920. Anybody? What was the need of having an international organization at that point in time to maintain world peace?
Like there were so many countries involved in the World War I. So to maintain peace between all those countries, the League of Nations came into force.
All right. Are there any other answers?
World War I caused so much destruction that no one wanted another war to cause even more or even the same amount of destruction. So that there is international peace and there are disagreements are resolved, they formed an organization which would resolve the global disagreements.
Alright. So, appreciating from these two answers which we just received, or these two opinions, we can understand that the common intention behind forming such an organization was to avoid dispute, to avoid war, to avoid destruction. So now, if you can establish a link, the link towards an international organization for peace is that to avoid war. So now, let's try to understand why these wars actually did happen and what was the exact thinking that went behind in having so many different disputes in the European region at that time. Is there anybody who could briefly highlight the reasons as to why wars are fought? Yes, sir.
So the basic reason for wars being fought is actually trying to show someone's power. Like one country feels that they have the best army, so to prove it, the only way they have is war. Second, some people at that time they were believing that by increasing their land usage or land consumption, they have more land consumption. Obviously, more the land, more population they can support, more resources, and most of the wars were also because of the resource thing, right? People want resources, so they would go fight to a country which has that particular resource.
Any other opinions? Yes, ma'am? If this microphone could be circulated. Thank you.
The World War I, it took place because of the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. I don't remember his.
Right.
And World War II was because there was bankruptcy in Germany, so this man, Hitler, he came up with the ideology that it was because of the Jews that the bankruptcy had occurred, because the Jews were moneylenders at that time.
True. But these are probably the small incidents which led to these world wars to come into existence. We're trying to understand why wars are generally fought between two powers. Yes, ma'am. Right in front. Could you please raise your hand? Yes.
Expansion of territories, because all of them wanted to become the superpowers, so they wanted to colonize more and more countries, and some countries, due to a lot of historical reasons, kind of fell behind, so they had to fight for a particular country because some countries were already ahead of them.
True.
That's how the world wars were caused.
True. So, yes, ma'am. Right there.
I think from all the incidents they told us, it's pretty clear that revenge is a pretty big incentive for a war to start.
Revenge could be an incentive, that's true. Sir at the end.
At a more fundamental level, there are primarily two reasons for going to war. It's either an ideological war, which led to the Crusades, or it is an economic war, which is generally in the form of either acquiring more territory to sustain more population or gain more resources, or simply showing dominance over another government so as to, a fiefdom, so to speak.
True. So basically, there is a common consensus as to why states or why nations go to war. Primarily, there could be, as very well highlighted, there are two main factors, two factors in which the reason for war could be bifurcated into. One could be the ideological reasons, which led to the three crusades back in the 18th or the 17th century. And followed by that, there is the economic reason. There is the reason for imperialism. And precisely because of which, the primary motive lies either in expansion of territory. It could be for acquiring more resources. The resources could range from anywhere between human resources to natural resources and anything that the nation wishes to acquire. And at the same time, finally, it could just be a reason for show of power, right? So these wars led to a very disturbing scenario in Europe back in the 16th and 17th century. At this point in time, the idea of international relations was very slowly developing and was in its nascent stage. It was Hugo Grotius who, for the first time, even spoke of the international relations between countries, which leads to either war or peace. So Hugo Grotius is termed to be the father of international law and international relations as such, who could talk about these issues back at that point in time. So, drawing our understanding from that period, there were two types of ideologies which existed. One was that of the pacifists, and one was the followers of the just war theory. The pacifists were of the opinion that irrespective of what the situation is, the primary goal or primary motto of every nation in Europe, because everything at that time was very Europe-centric when we are talking about the pacifist philosophers back then, that the peace of the land holds the foremost good or foremost value in the administration of justice back then. And therefore, any and all types of war were denounced by the pacifists. A very eminent pacifist philosopher is known to be Erasmus, who came into the point of writing about these things openly, and later on it was followed by various different thinkers, even in the modern days. The other faction that we are talking about are the believers of the just war theory. The just war theory is that war, up to an extent, is fine, but it should be supported by two factors. One is known as, these are Latin phrases, jus ad bellum, and the other is jus in bello. I'll spell it for you. It's J-U-S space A-D space B-E-L-L-U-M. Jus ad bellum means there should be permissible reasons for going to war. And secondly is jus in bello, B-E-L-L-O. And that means that the actions during the war should be permissible and reasonable. Now, why we are going into these details or these forms of philosophy back then is because these philosophy or these thinking were the ones which were considered or rather read through during the drafting of the Charter of the League and at the same time the Charter of the United Nations in 1945 and during those 5 years preceding it. So the idea of jus ad bellum, which talks about permissible reasons for going to war, are further substantiated by 7 points which I would like you all to remember, or rather take note of, that firstly there should be a just cause for going to war. There should be a just cause for going to war. There should be a right authority for initiating the use of force. There should be a right authority for initiating the use of force. The third point would be there should be a right intention to use force. Fourthly, use of force should be proportional in nature. Use of force should be proportional in nature. Fifth point stands as use of force should be the last resort. That it should be the last measure that needs to be taken, and you have exhausted all your previous means. Sixth point is that the use of force should have peace as the ultimate goal. Use of force should have peace as its ultimate goal. And lastly, that in the process of war, there should be a reasonable hope of success. So these were the permissible reasons in order to go to war. And when we talk about jus in bello, there are only two precepts that guided this principle. One is that there should be the proportionality of means. Proportionality of means. That indicates that there should not be unnecessary destruction of territory, resources and other elements which should not be harmed. And secondly, there is the principle of immunity towards the non-combatant. Now, who is a non-combatant in a war? Persons who are not fighting on the either side of the war. Essentially civilians, persons who are helping for making these aids and resources reach either side in order to help the persons who are affected in the war. So basically the ones who are not involved in the war should be in a position of immunity and they should not be harmed. So when you are going through these two concepts, you will realize that more or less these are the precise principles on which the UN was formed almost 2 centuries later. So when you go through these points of just cause, the right authority, the right intention, peace as its ultimate goal, that it should be the last resort. When you are reading the Charter of the United Nations, you will find and appreciate that these are precisely the points which have been covered in the UN Charter, and these are the very reasons why the UN exists. So just war theory was a very valid source in order to understand the use of force part of the UN Charter, and at the same time the pacifist theory is to understand that how at all times peace should be the ultimate goal. Alright. So, well, we know that the League of Nations came into being in around 1920s, and the United Nations was formed in 1945. But in a sense, humanitarian law in itself started to be codified back in the 1800s. In 1864, how many of you are aware that there was a Geneva Convention or a Geneva Conference which was held? You must be having it in your history, right? Could you tell me what was the goal of that conference? Anyone? Could we have the microphone? Anyone who could tell me why the Geneva Convention or Geneva Conference happened in 1864?
laid the foundation of modern human rights, the concept of human rights, and also in times of war, what was the permissible course of action, and what was the permissible method of execution of war in itself.
That's right. See, Geneva Convention and followed by the Hague Conferences of 1899 and 1909 were convened in order to codify humanitarian law as we know it now. What is humanitarian law? It is that law which is applicable during the time of war. There are two types of law that we are talking about, international law and essentially during the times of conflict. One is humanitarian law and one is human rights law, and there is a difference between these two. So ideally when we are talking about humanitarian law, it is a law which applies at the time of conflict or at the time of war. And when we are talking about human rights law, it is the law which is applicable during peacetime. Okay? So the conferences of Geneva followed by Hague were conducted in order to codify this humanitarian law as to what should be the ideal measure of force that you are using against another state, and at the same time, who are the persons against whom there should be no atrocities or violence committed, and how collateral damage could be avoided, and what are the basic human rights which you can never violate in any point in time during even the course of war or not. So this was the beginning of codification of law we can understand as it is, followed by which we had the League of Nations which came into being as an organization. Now, League of Nations was formulated by the winning powers of the World War I, and essentially it kept out the non-victors of the World War I out of its mandate and out of its concern. And that is precisely the reason there was no tab which was kept upon the members of the League of Nations, and in the due course in time, it fell out, it couldn't hold itself together, and therefore we find that the League was finally disbanded in the 1930s. Now, what could be the reason why this or why such an organizational setup did not work as to what is the League of Nations? Could you tell me the failures or rather the reasons why the League of Nations failed in the 1930s? Yes?
Maybe because all were winners and there was a lot of conflict between them.
There was a lot of conflict between?
Like all were winners, so they were all conflict. They had the different views.
Yes, there was one important point which you highlighted is there was a conflict of interest between the various victors of World War I, and they had their own egos to deal with in that organization, because of which it couldn't stand. Any other reasons that could be highlighted? Yes?
I think all the countries in the League of Nations had the veto power, so any decision could not be taken because to any decision there was a sort of objection. So strong decisions were very hard to take. Maybe that was one reason why it fell apart.
True. We can't say that all nations in the League had the veto power, but definitely there was no concept of one vote per nation. And therefore any resolution or any idea that could be effected into would be only by the consensus of all the states. And even if a lobby of states did not agree to, maybe a small lobby of 2 or 3 states, the decision could not be reached. Secondly, there was high irregularities in the meeting patterns of this organization. There was very little coordination. The secretariat did not function properly, and eventually the organization failed. So, there was no particular body as the Security Council in the UN, which was entrusted with the governing of the entire organization. And therefore, from the League of Nations, we understand that without a governing body for such an organization, international law cannot become enforceable. And also, without the mandate or without the power to develop and enforce international law, any international organization will fail in its nature. And that was precisely the lack which the League of Nations had. It did not ever try to develop or codify international law. It was all about international politics and relation which was there. There was no international law in picture. So you might be considering at this point in time that maybe an UN conference is all about international law, but a substantial part of it is governed by international law. And therefore, when you are dealing with any topic in an UN conference, it would be in a position of your interest to go through the very basic principles of international law which governs such a topic. Right? So moving on from here, you have to tell me now as to how the UN came into existence. Fine. Till now we have understood as to the League of Nations being not a workable solution to the entire concept of post-World War I. So now could you tell me how the United Nations came into existence? Or what were the chain of conferences which led to the formation of the UN? Do you have any idea about that? Any conference that you can think of which led to the formation of the UN? Yes?
The Dumbarton Oaks Conference.
The Dumbarton Oaks Conference, the last one before the UN was formulated, that's true. Any other conference that you remember? Did I hear San Francisco? Loudly.
San Francisco.
That's right, San Francisco Conference. That was the one in which the UN Charter was drafted. Any other conference that you know about? Yes?
The London Declaration, the very first conference.
One second. What is this?
The London Declaration.
The Declaration of?
London, where the countries of Australia and Canada.
So basically, the Declaration of the United Nations.
Yes, the very first one.
Right. Was there a conference coming up from that side?
Atlantic Charter.
The Atlantic Charter, that's right. Atlantic Charter was the precise beginning of the conception of the UN. Now in 1941, Winston Churchill and Roosevelt met somewhere in the Atlantic. The location still stands undisclosed. And they agreed upon it that once the Nazi tyranny comes to an end, we would come together in order to establish permanent ban on the use of force by countries, thereby formulating a strategy for international peace. After the Atlantic Charter, that is also called the Atlantic Charter, after the Atlantic Charter was drawn up, we have the Declaration of the United Nations, which gentlemen there spoke of. It happened in the New Year's Day of 1942. Approximately 26 countries ranging from Belgium, Australia, Canada, China, India, Poland, etc. came together, and in Washington such conference was convened, out of which there were some important points which came up. One being that all countries participating in this conference agreed that there is a need for an international organization which deals with world peace, or which as its goal has world peace as the primary objective. Followed by this, there were a couple of conferences in Moscow and Tehran, wherein 6 to 7 parties met together and decided upon the nuances of this new international organization. And followed by which we had the Dumbarton Oaks proposal, which was also formed in the US. According to this proposal, there was supposed to be a world organization, as the proposal reads, that there should be a world organization. The discussion on this world organization should happen in 2 phases. The first phase consisted of the UK, the US and the USSR. And the second phase of the conference consisted of the UK, the US and China. Coming out of this was a proposal in which a world organization was highlighted. It was also highlighted that US, UK, France, China and Russia would be the final 5 permanent members of this world organization. It was also held that no country in this world would be able to challenge the membership of these 5 countries in that world organization. And at the same time, it was also decided that on 25th April 1945, there would be a meeting in San Francisco inviting the members of the Declaration of UN Conference to come together in order to draft the charter of this international organization. Which brings us to the San Francisco Conference. In San Francisco Conference, it started on 25th April. The charter was also drawn up during the same time, and after almost 1 month's deliberation, it came into being that these 50 countries came together, drafted the Charter of the United Nations, and finally the entire system and setup of the conference or the organization was dealt with. Now, following this, 4 months later, the United Nations came into existence or being from the 24th of October 1945, which we now know as the United Nations Day. And this was when majority of these countries out of the initial 51 had submitted their ratification instruments, and finally the UN came into existence. Now, in this brief history of UN, you would find that right from the inception of the idea of the UN, you could see that there has been a political imbalance in its structure. Right from the beginning, though this conference or this organization wanted to inculcate all the countries in this world together, there were 5 superior countries who had decided to stay in the organization as a permanent member of the foremost council of that organ, and that is the Security Council. So this brings us to understanding that what exactly was the UN Charter and how we would be able to appreciate the use of UN Charter in our conference in the Pune UN. Do you have any questions with respect to the history of the UN till now? Anything that you wish to clarify at this point? Seeing none. Now, the Charter of the United Nations highlights the preamble of the organization as to what are its aims, what are its goals, what are the purposes for which the UN has been brought into existence. It also establishes 6 principal organs of the United Nations, which we know as the General Assembly, the UN Security Council, the Economic and Social Council, the Trusteeship Council, the International Court of Justice, and the Secretariat. Allow me to highlight the important roles of these 6 bodies, which are also simulated in our conference up to an extent. The General Assembly is the most highly represented body of the United Nations. It consists of all the member states of the UN and also all the non-member states of the UN, and also the member states who have an observer status at the United Nations. Now, it consists of the 193 countries, approximately 20 odd non-member states. The non-governmental and intergovernmental organizations also find a representation, and at the same time there are observer states who are not allowed to vote during the sessions of the General Assembly. The General Assembly is basically a plenary body. It is where all the countries come together in order to formulate the recommendations on 5 to 6 main topics. These topics that deal with international relations, politics, law and order deal with firstly disarmament and international security, for which you have the Committee 1 of the UN, the DISEC. Along with this, you have economic and financial reasons with which the General Assembly deals with. That is why you have the Economic and Financial Committee, the ECOFIN. Thirdly, you have the committee which deals with the socio-cultural and humanitarian aspects. and thereby that's the reason you have the SOCOM as the third committee. The fourth committee of the UN is the Special Political and Decolonization Committee. It is to deal with issues relating to decolonization and special political status of various persons as well as states. Along with that, you have the fifth committee of the UN dealing with administrative and budgetary matters, and that's why it's known as the Administrative and Budgetary Committee. And the sixth committee of the UN General Assembly is known as the Legal Committee, which deals with the codification of international law and the international legal topics that the UN has to deal with. All the organizations or all the committees that form part of the General Assembly have a representation of 193 member states, except for the Administrative and Budgetary Committee, which has a very restrictive membership. Followed by this, you have the UN Security Council. Could anyone tell me what is the composition of the UN Security Council? Yes? Loudly.
15 countries, 10 of which are temporary and 5 are permanent, the P5 members.
That's right. The total representation is that of 15 countries, of which 5 countries have permanent status. Who are those 5 countries? Russia, China, one by one. Okay, let's come in the alphabetical order. First, China, France, Russia, UK or US? UK, US. That's right. The 5 permanent states of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, along with that 10 non-permanent members whose election happens every 2 years. So every 2 years you would have non-permanent member states taking over, and the other non-permanent member states who were elected would leave the council. This voting procedure and the election process is also dealt with by the General Assembly, who recommend a set of members to the Security Council. The Security Council reverts to the General Assembly with those recommendations, and finally an election happens at the UN General Assembly, which elects those non-permanent members to the Security Council. Right? Now, let's quickly try to understand what are the powers of the General Assembly and what are the powers of the UN Security Council. The General Assembly very basically has a recommendatory power. All that you can do in the General Assembly is recommend, suggest, appreciate, condemn, and nothing which is decisive in nature. If there is any decision that needs to be taken, any direction, any declaration that needs to be made, is done through the UN Security Council. Therefore, any resolution or any outcome document which comes from the General Assembly is not binding on the member states, while the outcome documents which come through the UN Security Council are absolutely binding on all countries whatsoever. Right? Is there any trouble understanding the function of the General Assembly and the Security Council? Anybody? Seeing none, we'll proceed to the Economic and Social Council. Economic and Social Council has a membership strength of around 54 to 57 members. Now, this keeps changing according to the requirement of the Council, but these are the only 2 numbers. Now, the Economic and Social Council deals with topics that have an economic and social importance, which are recommended to it by the General Assembly. Those topics which are not covered within the mandate of the General Assembly are put forward to the Economic and Social Council in order to deal with it in a better fashion. The Economic and Social Council can formulate commissions and committees within it in order to deal with these issues which come up. And that is how we have the Commission on Science and Technology for Development. You have the Commission on Sustainable Development, you have the Commission for the Status of Women, you have the Commission for Population and Development, etc. as part of the Economic and Social Council. Again, the Economic and Social Council has very limited recommendatory powers towards it. Next, let's try to understand the Trusteeship Council. The Trusteeship Council was last convened in the 1960s. And after that, there was no concern regarding the trusteeship of any country which came up. Do you remember studying trusteeship back in history as to what it was, the mandate countries? There was one state whose mandate was with another powerful state, etc. If you could remember, you remember the issue of Palestine dealing with or having its link with UK as the mandate country. And UK had the trusteeship of the Israel-Palestinian region back in the 1940s, after which the entire situation kind of derailed, as we know. So that was the role of the Trusteeship Council, dealing with the issues of trusteeship that were back in 1945. So from 1945 to 1965, this council performed, or rather dealt with its business properly. And after 1965, there was no need to have the Trusteeship Council engaged anymore. So as of today, the members of the Trusteeship Council are the 5 permanent members of the Security Council. And if at any point in time in future the council needs to convene, these 5 members can come together and convene such a council. Right? Let's move on to appreciate the International Court of Justice. The International Court of Justice is a world court to which only states can come to. It has the jurisdiction to entertain any such matter which 2 disputing states submit themselves to. Right? So the ICJ, or the International Court of Justice, cannot by itself take up any matter or any issue that it feels to be of concern. 2 conflicting states, 2 states which have a dispute, need to submit themselves to the power of the ICJ or power of the International Court in order to get such a dispute adjudged. Right? So this also brings us to an important point of consent being the very force of law in general when it comes to international law. If the countries do not consent to, there is no international law which comes into existence. Only when the countries agree and consent to and give themselves to such a law, only then such a law comes towards and binds the countries with it. Right? So the International Court of Justice also consists of 15 judges who are appointed by an independent panel consisting of the General Assembly, the Permanent Court of International Arbitration. Those are matters which we will not be dealing with in our conference here. And lastly, we have the Secretariat. The Secretariat consists of the administrative wing of the UN officials, which is headed by the Secretary General of the organization. And the typical building that you see of the UN in your textbooks and often the glass building that you see right across Manhattan, that is the secretarial building of the UN. The General Assembly is not situated there. The General Assembly and the other committees function in another block altogether. So that is the Secretariat building, and the Secretariat deals with the countries, the member states of the countries, and the other officials of the UN, and how to make these negotiations, these deliberations, these meetings of the UN the most successful in the administrative manner possible. Right? Any queries with respect to the 6 principal organs of the UN? Are there? Could you raise your hand? Seeing none. Now let's try to understand that if this is the organizational setup, and I can already see that many of you have been allocated your countries and committees for this particular conference, you would now want to understand that what is your role in this conference, right? Okay, so what is it that you think being a delegate in an MUN conference mean to be? What do you think is the role of a delegate in an MUN conference? Or what do you even understand by the term delegate or representative of a country? Anybody? Yes, ma'am?
Put forward the views of the country which I get for that specific committee which I get. So, for example, if I have spent for...
Thank you.
Put forward the views of the country which I get. So if I have spec ball, then I talk about that country's problems with that and my agenda.
Regarding your agenda, regarding your country's problems and your views in that committee. Okay. Anything else? what is your role in that conference or in that committee? Yes, ma'am?
Personally speaking, I think it is very important that I protect my country's agenda in the committee. So I try to formulate my view before some other country does. So I protect my interests first. From every, let's say from unmod or even in a mod, I would try to, advertise my country more and try to get my ideologies through.
What is an unmod or a mod?
Like unmoderated caucus and a moderated caucus.
Alright, so that is something which we have done in any other MBN conference. Okay. So those are procedures which we will not be having in this conference. There will be no moderated or unmoderated caucus as such. So anything else? The most important part which we need to realize. If you are representing your country in a conference over the next 2 days, who are you essentially? Are you yourself? Are you representing yourself? Or what are you doing in that conference? Yes.
For those 2 days, you are a member of the country, you are a citizen of the country, and you have to represent the country as a citizen of the country.
I would say that up to an extent, yes, you should try to put yourself in the shoes of a diplomat of that country. Because primarily, the UN boils down to plain and simple diplomacy, which is not really plain and simple. Complicated in a lot of ways and instances, you will have to strike a balance of your country's opinions, views and foreign policy in line with the 193 other member states, or in instant case 40 other delegates who are present in your own committee. So primary thing that you need to realize is your role in the committee, which we call role realization. That during the 2 days of the conference, you will have to think, analyze and put forth your opinion, not in a personal capacity, but in the capacity of a government official of your own country. Every country at the UN, who is a member state of the UN, has a permanent mission at the United Nations. So it's the permanent office of that country at the UN. So if we are talking about India, India will have its permanent mission of India at the United Nations. Talking about Brazil, permanent mission of Brazil at the United Nations. This is the High Commission office set up around the UN. It's not exactly in the UN, but it is the office which stands to be the medium of communication between the United Nations and the foreign affairs offices back in the country. Okay? So when you are representing your country in those 2 days, you will assume your role as a diplomat of that country, and whatever you think should be the ideal solution for that problem or the topic that you are dealing with, try to detach yourself from it and think of it from the perspective of your country. Now, you might be thinking that a problem of an international nature will definitely have a solution which might appear to be common to everyone or might sound very reasonable to everyone, but that is not always true. If you are aware of the current affairs with respect to Syria, for example, all the majority of the countries are of the opinion that Syria should stop the combat or attack from the government side, from the official military side against the civilians, and the rebel forces should be allowed to take over. But what if you are the delegate of Syria? Would you say the same thing? Yes? No. So what appears to be the right thing may not be the right thing when you are the representative of the country. When you're talking about Iran, the entire world is against Iran in order to try to stop Iran from enriching uranium in order to produce nuclear weapons or try to start its nuclear weapons research. But this might appear to be a very common thing that, okay, nuclear weapons are bad, they are a threat to mankind, humanity, etc. But what if you are the delegate of Iran in a committee which is dealing with nuclear weapons and its issues? over there, you would have to put forth a perspective from the point of the government of Iran, from the view that the government of Iran endorses and not you personally. So this is what we call as role realization. There are various different countries which have their compromisable positions with respect to foreign policy on various matters, various topics in various different forums. And when you assume the role of such a country, you will have to put forth your ideas, your views, and your foreign policy should be represented in the best manner possible in line with your country's interests. Alright? So first thing that you would do going back from this place would be to look up the foreign policy of your country. By doing this, I'm bringing you to the point of research first and not the procedure. When you're talking about the UN, procedure makes very little sense later. And that's why we will be dealing with procedure of the UN in the event of 14th December. Today we will be primarily dealing with research, and I believe that many of you are having concerns and issues with respect to your research at this point in time, right? So we'll proceed on to understanding research first for your conference, and then we'll move on to procedure on the 14th, right? So firstly, when you go back today, you would try to look up the foreign policy of your country. Now how do you do that? What is the foreign policy, or what do you understand by the term foreign policy? Anybody? Yes, ma'am?
The country's relationship with other countries.
The country's relations with other country?
Yes. How, for example, coal sharing or petroleum sharing. So what relations they have with other countries?
Would you call that as foreign policy or international relations? Here we are again making a differentiation that relations is different from your policy. Alright? Now, our relations, or India's relations with Pakistan is much different from what India's policy is with Pakistan or towards Pakistan in that case. So you need to understand that going up on Wikipedia and trying to look up foreign relations of countries with other countries is not your foreign policy. It's just a statement of who your allies might be and who your countries might not have good relations with. Why I'm using the word might? Because Wikipedia is not always right. It's an open editable platform, and that's why primarily we would discourage you from using that website or any other website which is of a commercial nature and does not deal with the official sources of the UN. So when you're required to do your research, primarily you should trust the UN website, any governmental websites of your own country, and thirdly, the other websites of the UN organs, and lastly, at most we can go up to Reuters. You spell Reuters as R-U-T-E-R-S, right? This is the lowest possible method until which we can reach. Anything apart from this would not be considered as an official source in this conference. If you are simulating the UN in the best manner possible, we would also be sticking to the sources of the UN in the right manner. Yes, ma'am.
I had a doubt. During the way my committee is moving, can I actually make a statement saying I draw this source from Reuters? Will it be considered right?
If you have
Like
a printed document,
yeah.
or an electronic copy of the document which would show that it is from Reuters. Okay? But at the same time, official statistics which form a part of a UN website, which are also given in your country's website, which is also given in Reuters. Now, if you have the same, or rather you have the statistics for the same topic on 3 different websites, whom would the UN consider to be right? Let's say you're talking about number of civilians killed in Sri Lanka during the fight with LTTE. So if there's a figure posted in the UN website, there's a figure which is given on the Reuters website, there's a figure which is given in the official website of the government of Sri Lanka, which one would you consider to be true? The UN would consider UN to be true. but you would consider your country's website to be true. And that is how you would go ahead to say that according to the sources and statistics of the government of Sri Lanka, this is what I put forth. But if you're any other country apart from Sri Lanka, you would suggest that the UN figures stand to be true. Right? In whatever manner possible. So primarily, as I have highlighted, your sources for research stand to be anything and everything that is from the UN website, anything and everything that forms a part of your country's official information source, okay? Any website which ends with gov. Your country's tag. As in, for example, if it's India, the government of India websites normally end with gov.in. Okay? Then UK ends as gov.uk. And there are various other modes of identifying the government websites. Apart from this, you can look into Reuters at most and the permanent mission of your country at the UN. So that would end as un.net or INT, one of these. Yes.
Can we use international press for research?
What is the international press?
Say the countries, when you see a certain foreign policy of a particular country, so the press comments on that country's foreign policy. So can we use that kind of research?
No, that's media.
Okay.
Ideally, if you notice these days, every newspaper or every electronic medium communication has become international. You will have Pune Mirror commenting upon international issues as well. That doesn't mean we can take that as a source. So we would be very restrictive towards Reuters being the last source for anything related to media. Reuters is a media agency and we would only attach final credibility to anything which comes from Reuters. And definitely, if you ask me that if there is the same document from these 4 sources, the UN will consider its own document to be of the highest order of precedence. Okay? So, how to go about your foreign policy? Number 1, go home, look up for your official government's website, through which you will get the website of your country's Ministry of External Affairs or Foreign Affairs. Okay? I hope you are taking this down in order to understand it better. So firstly, look up your Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I would suggest that you give a brief reading to its goals, to what it wishes to achieve, and how it wishes to achieve those goals. Right? Then step 2 would be to look at your allotment. Which country have I been given? And which committee does that country represent in? Okay? So, understanding from these 2 points, you will find your agenda, which has been provided with your committee, and you would know that what exact information do you have to look up on the Foreign Affairs website. Right? So, give me an example. Is there anybody who is ready to volunteer with their committee and country? Somebody who has not spoken till now. Here. Dissect Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
What's your agenda?
United action towards the total elimination of nuclear weapons.
United action?
Towards the total elimination of nuclear weapons.
United action towards total elimination of nuclear weapons. Sri Lanka in the Disarmament and International Security Committee. Step 1. Go to your Foreign Affairs website of Sri Lanka. The language may not be English at times, so you need to translate that and find your information. If you use a Google Chrome browser, it will translate it for you automatically. Now, firstly, give a brief reading as to what are the documents present on the Foreign Affairs website of your country regarding nuclear policy of Sri Lanka. If there are documents, read them. Now, what documents am I talking about? I am not talking about a paper which would read as, okay, Sri Lanka's foreign policy on nuclear weapons. No. These documents which you need to look up would be statements of various government officials and international diplomats of Sri Lanka at various different forums regarding nuclear weapons. Okay? So you are basically trying to look up statements from your diplomats, and no research paper oriented matter or anything like a policy paper given highlighting that, okay, this is Sri Lanka's policy over the nuclear weapons. Not at all. So what you need to read through are the various statements. It could be 5 in number, it could be 50 in number. Read through them and identify that what is Sri Lanka's opinion over nuclear weapons. If you find such information on your country's website, that is the first point that you need to strengthen yourself on. If you don't, then you go to step 2. What is step 2? You go to the website of the United Nations, which is un.org. On un.org, you will have to go to that particular committee's website. Okay? So if you are in DISEC, you will be going to the General Assembly. From the General Assembly, you would find the 6 committees of the General Assembly, the first being DISEC. Click on DISEC, you will find meetings, documents, provisional agenda, the Bureau for DISEC, etc. You need to go through these links to see which one of these gives you the minutes of the meetings and the various statements which the countries and the heads of states have made in that committee. One important thing is that in this conference, every agenda that we are dealing with is one which has been discussed at the UN and is currently in the process of decision making. So one can never complain of the lack of resources. There are a lot of other conferences which give you a random agenda as a current topic or a current matter of discussion. But over here, each of your agenda are actual agendas of the UN. And you would find them on the UN website if you go on the right link. Okay? So go to your committee, your commission or your council's website through the UN and try to find out what your country has stated at the UN with respect to that topic. And you will find it. There is no way in which you cannot find it. You just need to go to the UN website and conduct a thorough search of the materials that are available on that commission or council or committee's website. Okay? That's the UN part. Now, if you have still failed to obtain any information, which is highly unlikely, then you can go on to Reuters in order to understand your agenda better. Okay? To understand who are your allies, to understand what are your relations with other countries, and this is also not easy. You will have to read through each of these media reports, you have to read through each of these statements in order to find that if your country is taking a favorable position against or in favor of some country or against some country. Alright? Any queries? Yes? Alright, we'll start from there.
If suppose I'm China in the Security Council,
okay,
then I am reading the statements what China has said in the meeting in the UN.
Okay.
So I also read the statements of other countries. Like suppose the statement that the US has made, the Security Council. True. But the US delegate says something contrary to the statement made in the UN. So is he held to that?
If you have a credible source identifying that what the US delegate is stating over here is absolutely against his policy at the UN, then you may bring that out through a point of order. Alright? To bring it to the notice of the executive board. Honestly, the conference officials who would be chairing you in this event would be well equipped in order to deal with such policy diversions. So, it's highly unlikely that you may have to point it out against that delegate, because before that, the conference officials would be in a position to identify it. Right? Any other queries? Yes, ma'am?
If we can't find any solid information about the future plans, can we as a delegate of the put in our ideas about that?
True, up to an extent that your country's future policies may not be highlighted, or any future solution that you may wish to propose but your country has not exactly done so, then do one thing. Stick to your country's policy, see or try to visualize that in the next 5 to 10 years time, if you propose what you in your personal capacity would like to propose as a delegate of your country, will it be acceptable to your country? and will it go in line with your foreign policy? If yes, go ahead, propose it. If it's acceptable, if even the conference officials find it plausible, they will accept it. If not, they will be there to guide you in order to rephrase it. Okay? Any other queries? Yes, ma'am?
For example, I am a human rights in Syria and
You are?
For example, I am in Human Rights Committee for Syria.
Human Rights Council?
Council for Syria.
You're representing Syria in the Human Rights Council?
Yes.
Okay.
Am I supposed to speak from, I'm supposed to favor who? The government or the people? Should I be speaking in the favor of people? Because we all know that the government is supposed to be blamed for
True.
whatever's happening, the deteriorating situation.
Very interesting point here. That here is a question that what is right or what is just against what is the government's policy. So your question is that which one of these should you stick to? I would allow you to answer this very question. If you are a diplomat of your country, who appoints you? The government. You go to represent your country at the UN under the seal of the government. The government or the Ministry of Foreign Affairs helps you in order to understand the policies of the government to represent. True? So in that case, whom would you be representing in the council? That's right. Could the mic be transferred, please?
My question was that even if the government does appoint me, and when I'm favoring them, I'm basically supposed to be protecting my country, putting my point forward for the other delegates, right?
True. Here you need to understand that from what country are you representing at the UN? Or from what country do you come at the UN to represent yourself? Would such a statement that you make at the UN favoring your civilians and not your government be appreciated back at home? Will it be by your government?
It will be appreciated by the government but not by the people.
No. If you make a statement in favor of the civilians and the rebel forces, will it be appreciated by the government?
Obviously not.
Would you like to antagonize your government?
Thank you.
Any other queries? Yes, sir?
In the process of research, there are certain documents of foreign countries which are in their own national languages.
Right.
Now, in such cases, due to language barriers, how are we supposed to proceed?
What is your allocation?
Mine is IAEA for Ukraine.
Ukraine, IAEA.
Yeah.
So it would be in Belarusian.
Yeah.
Okay. So I would suggest that if any translate or translation software is available, try to understand the crux of the issue through it. But at the same time, you could ask us for any assistance because we have professional translating softwares in our aid all the time back in law school. So we are able to help you out in that manner if it is absolutely impossible for you to understand the essence of the issue through such translation. We are ready to help you that way.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Anything regarding your research that you have faced difficulty until now? None? Okay. Here.
When there's a situation such as climate change, you can't really go to a particular country about it. When there's a particular problem such as climate change that you have to talk about, you can't really go according to one country, supposing Germany.
Your committee is UNFCCC?
Yes.
Okay.
So it's usually climate changes are for the whole world. It's more or less similar. Like some case, global warming, for example, it just heats up. So you can't really specify for one country. So how do you go about that?
How do you go about a topic wherein the interest is common of all the countries, right? Here, in a lot of situations, that's why I'm telling you that your international relations and international policy are two different things, right? Firstly, once you understand what is your country's individual international policy without looking at any other countries, without trying to understand what the other countries wish to say, opine or put forth, if you have understood your country's own policy, that is your first step to start with. After this, you would come to the important point of interacting with other delegates in order to have your opinion sanctioned in the right manner. Okay? So here we come towards the point of who are our allies and who are the countries which we have not had good relations in working with. Okay? So when there is an issue which is having common repercussions on all the countries, there is still some difference between the countries in dealing with it. Okay? Now let's talk about carbon emissions for that matter. Okay? This is one problem which has been identified common by various countries ranging from US, China, UK, India, some of the African states in Central Africa and many. That's how the Kyoto Protocol came into existence, etc. But though the problem is common, many countries will have a different group of allies to agree with. Okay? So there are a set of countries which believe that the responsibility to cut down on carbon emissions should be on those countries which are recently in the process of development. And there are countries which believe that the responsibility should be shared equally by all the countries. Okay? So in this case, there are some very basic international relations which could be overlooked. For example, Iran and US might come together to say or join their voice together in order to say something regarding global warming. But at the same time, they need to be within the scope of their policy in order to suggest what they are saying. So despite agreeing that the problem is common, they will still have their own limitation up to which they can agree with each other. And you need to identify that through the various deliberations that have taken place in the past. Yes?
What if the agenda is pretty broad? How do we narrow down our research?
If the agenda is very broad,
narrow it down to our own country.
okay. Our question is, if the agenda is a very broad topic, how do we narrow down to the research? Now, when the agenda is very broad, you need to understand one thing, that only a committee which has recommendatory powers can deal with such a broad agenda. Because when you're talking about the Security Council, for example, the agenda is very pinpointed. It is regarding so and so situation in so and so country. Let's say human rights situation in Syria. That is how it is framed. But when you are talking about your council being the IAEA, it is the International Atomic Energy Agency. The composition is different, the forum is different, the way deliberations take place is different, and the powers of such an agency are also different. That is the reason you need to first go to their website, that particular organization's or committee's website, to understand that in the year 2014, in January, what is the topic which concerns them. So if your main topic is nuclear security, you need to understand that what part of nuclear security does your country have to deal with or put forth at the International Atomic Energy Agency during this period, or what is the current issue that concerns us. If you bring in issues which have been covered back in the 1960s and 70s regarding nuclear establishments and weapons grade uranium, etc., then such issues are not relevant anymore. So you need to also identify what is relevant in your council on that day of the conference. proceed accordingly. There's a question over here.
If your country is a non-democratic country, so how do we know the information given in the official website is complete?
You never know, but that is your government's position.
Especially if it's like a military dictatorship, probably they might not be releasing everything. They might be just giving half of their actual policy.
Whom are you representing again?
Myanmar.
Your government? At the end of the day, you're representing your government, right? What if you do not stick to the figures presented by the government? What could be the repercussions back home?
You might just sack me.
Not just sack would be still better. So when you're dealing with countries which do not have democracy, or rather, it's not about democracy as such. You're talking about absolute dictatorial rules or regime which do not have value for human rights as such. Because when you talk about the UK has a parliamentary system of government, but at the same time, it is a monarchy. Okay? So, well, absence of democracy cannot be considered to be the only standard to find out. But at the same time, you need to stick to present only your government's policy. Because, again, it takes us to point one, role realization. You are a diplomat of your country. For those days, you will be representing only your country and nothing else. No personal opinion, no moral views, and no what is right. Only what is fair for your country. So, we need to differentiate between that in order to present ourselves better as a diplomat.
Thank you.
Will I be allowed to use the information given on the official websites of other countries to maybe reinforce my point?
If you're saying, let's consider an example where the delegate of a country XYZ, any country, suggests that these are the figures according to what I say. If you wish to contradict that point of that delegate and say that in your own country's website this is what is mentioned, or your own country has presented to the public domain that these are the actual figures, how can you contradict that? That's fine.
Okay.
But if it does not hold any relevance to the present situation, you may not be required to contradict it.
Okay.
It's at the end of the day, you are a diplomat. It is according to your own wish what you wish to do in the council. There.
My friend here, she spoke about that she's representing Syria and she's in the Human Rights Council. So if she speaks for the government, then how is she even helping her own people? And the goal of the Human Rights Council is to improve the conditions of humans all over the world. Then how is it helping anyone anyway?
Okay. So your query is, if you are representing the government and you have to say only what the government has to say, then how exactly is it benefiting towards the goal of the council? Try to put yourself in the position of the representative of Syria and understand that for what reason is the representative of Syria in that council? Is it in order to make a statement of admitting the guilt, or is it for the reason of defending the country's current status or current stand? Now, the purpose of a Model UN conference, as many people have spoken, the purpose has been identified as bringing out innovative ideas, creative solutions and things of this nature. But at the end of the day, a Model UN conference, by the very words of the UN, it is simulated in order to give the students or the participants an actual idea of how the UN functions. So if a delegate at the United Nations is giving such a statement against its own government or policy, then would it be fair in such a simulation that we have something of this nature happen?
Would it be fair?
It would not be fair as such. So you need to, for those 2 days, you need to only focus upon what your government is putting forth or what your country wishes to do at that time. If in the course of the next 2 months we find that Syria is in a position to compromise with the other countries, then in that case you are allowed to do so. If we have seen through the reports that the government has finally decided to humble down and take part in negotiations, then in that case you can go ahead to narrow your policy down in those manners and only in those respects as positioned by the government, and nothing more than that.
Thank you.
Here. So we'll come back to you. Yeah.
If I'm a delegate for Somalia from SOCA. So,
From?
SOCA.
No, what's your country?
Somalia.
Somalia.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the agenda is child rights.
Child rights.
So why should I go ahead and talk about my child rights? Because why should other countries question the rights in my country?
Now when you're talking about Somalia, in that instant situation, the child rights of your country may not be very good or may not be very developed and recognized or noticed as such. So what you can do is, being Somalia, try to understand that what is your power equation with the other countries. Are you a country who can come up to the podium and say that this is how I go, or else we don't talk about it? Probably a delegate of the US might be able to do in certain committees. I'm not saying that they should, because in the UN you don't. I'm just saying that do you command that kind of power within your committee? No. So in that case, what would be the best possible solution or best possible goodie that you can take back from this conference for your country? It could be in the form of defending that the child rights in your country at this position is absolutely fine and the government does not believe that there is anything that is going wrong, and represent your government's policy, or rather the part of government which wants you to say so. Or you can agree that yes, the child rights situation are not like that, and we would be welcoming international support in order to stabilize the situation of child rights in my country. There is no problem in humbling yourself down before the international community in order to receive help, because many countries do that as part of their official policy. So look into that again, will your country be fine with asking for international help and support? If yes, go ahead, do that. If no, then defend your country's current situation of rights. Let's talk about North Korea. North Korea at this instant has a very bad situation of human rights in the country. Do you think the government of North Korea will humble down for international support in order to help them in restructuring such a situation? Or will the government go ahead to defend its rights? Will it humble down as North Korea? North Korea has a dictatorial regime which has very less respect for human rights as such, and this is no secret. So in that case, the government may not want international support, interference, intervention, anything in order to help them with child rights as such. In that case, what you can do is you can defend the current position of North Korea in the best way possible, and at the same time suggest that I invite interference or I invite the support of countries which only I decide for. So you can ask for China, Pakistan, etc., the allies of North Korea, to help you in that manner. And any other country which is of the nature or allies of US may not be acceptable. So again, you need to find out two things: policy along with relations. Yes, sir. We can take a question from here first. And then no, absolutely you are. Go ahead.
I was just trying to throw a little light on the dilemma that lady put basically, and how can she speak against the good wishes?
How can someone talk about which is obviously incorrect, how she's talking about sex? So it's like this, that everything is not just true and false or black and white basically. So for the kind of teenage these people are, possibly need to just go little bit into the diplomat thing, basically, that what country they are representing and what those countries are doing right now. They need to assume that that is correct, and then only possibly they will be able to represent that country's diplomat in a correct way for those 2 days in India. That is what I can say possibly.
That's right. So you're in agreement with the aspect of representing your country the best manner possible, without questioning what is moral or what is right at that point. True. Yes.
If a country has violated an agreement with my country, am I allowed to use that to my favor?
Definitely. In whatever way you wish to. You can do that. If there is any international agreement between two countries and one of the countries has violated such an agreement, you can bring it to the light of the international forum only if it is relevant to the agenda that you are discussing.
So I can use it in my argument against that country?
Yes. But for example, if you are in a human rights council and you are talking about an international commercial agreement which was broken by your country and some other country according to your relations, then that may not be relevant in such a scenario. So if it is any bilateral treaty that deals with anything to do with human rights, and if it is relevant to the topic, then you can bring it up.
Thank you.
You will take a question from here and then we'll move that side. Yes.
Yeah, so my country is India and I'm representing ECOFIN. I'm part of ECOFIN and our agenda is something to do with Palestine. So how does that relate?
Something to do with Palestine, and you are in ECOFIN, Economic and Financial Committee. What is the exact agenda? Anybody from ECOFIN who can substantiate the agenda for ECOFIN? What is the exact agenda? The agenda for ECOFIN at this moment deals with the colonies and resettlement of the people in Palestine and the Syrian Golan. And that involves the committee to deal with and think about the economic and financial aspects, the burden, the support that is required in order to make such resettlement. And that being the base of it, you need to build up upon the very idea of resettlement, whether that is acceptable to the country or not. So it has a relevance towards ECOFIN, and when you go back to the website of the UN and go through the statements that have been made at the ECOFIN, you will understand in what context that agenda has been put forth. I would like to highlight that at this point in time, you have another website on the part of the UN website itself, which is of the name of Member States at the UN. Just Google Member States at the UN and you will find this website of the United Nations, which gives right from 1945 till date any and all statements made by diplomats of various countries in the committees which they have made the statements in. So all the statements, all the documents, all the resolutions have been documented on this website. And that is a very important point of your research.
I am representing Bangladesh in WTO. And,
WTO?
Yeah.
Okay.
And the topic is trade-related assistance to the least developed countries. So, am I to debate the pros and cons of the issue, or am I to just protect my own agenda?
WTO is a very tricky organization. Over here, more than looking towards what would be good for international peace and cooperation, etc., majority of the countries think about what we can take back from this place. And therefore, it would be in your best interest to stick to it, that what best cut and deal that you can make out of the deliberations in favor of Bangladesh.
So even if I understand that something which I want will not be fair to the other countries, I still have to protect my own agenda.
It's fair to your country. That's sufficient. We'll have a question from that side and we'll come back.
My committee is UN Human Rights Council. My agenda is deteriorating situation of human rights in the Syrian Arab Republic. And country is UK. So am I supposed to say how the rights are getting deteriorated? Or am I supposed to say what my country is doing in order to overcome the deterioration?
Both, and even more. See, when you're dealing with any topic at the UN, it's a 4-pointed research agenda that you need to take forward. First is, why are we even discussing this topic? First point in research is, what is the topic? If I'm asked to give a description of this topic tomorrow, will I be able to do that? If I'm asked that why is this topic even a concern of the United Nations or the committee in which I'm representing it, will I be able to do that? So in order for that, first thing that you need to look into is whether this topic is relevant at the UN and how and why. So what is the international importance of such a topic? Describe the topic. Secondly, see to it that you research upon what the United Nations has done to deal with this issue. Every agenda that you have in your committees deals with a particular international problem as such. So what has the UN done till date in order to resolve this issue? Why do you need to look into this part? So that you don't come up with the same solutions which have failed as the UN has suggested in the past. So that you come up with such solutions which are possible to be discussed at the UN, being the member of the country which you are representing, in line with your policy. Okay? So second would be to research upon, please have a seat. You can research upon what has the UN done in order to address this issue until now. The third point of research is, in what way has your country contributed towards this agenda till date? So what has your country, let's say what has UK done in order to stabilize the situation in Syria until now? Which is an important point as a Syrian, as a delegate of the UK, right? And from there on, the final thing is, what am I bringing to table today? That what are the solutions that I come up with in this conference today, which is incidental towards making my motive in this event successful. So when you are able to find your country's relations and policies along with these 4 questions highlighted, you will be able to formulate in very basic terms whatever is your foreign policy. Right? So you would know that what does the topic deal with, what does the topic have its solution to until now, what has my country done towards it, and what am I expected to do in future. That's right? Yes.
My committee is the SOCOM. I'm speaking for the promotion and protection of rights of children for Jamaica. How do I go about it? I mean, what do I do? Promotion as in, I didn't get the...
Promotion of child rights?
Yes, for Jamaica.
What do you understand by promotion of child rights? Personally, not as a delegate.
To make the rights of children better.
True.
Yeah,
so, being Jamaica, what are you supposed to do then?
I looked up the articles in the...
Understanding of the topic is absolutely fine. That to make child rights better in your country. Okay? So, your first point of research would be, what is child rights? What is the situation of child rights in Jamaica at this moment? Is it good? Is it bad? Could there be improvements which could be made? If yes, how? If no, why not? When you think on these lines, you are able to go towards a direction which will lead you to possible solutions for this topic.
Thank you so much.
And finally, you will be able to formulate Jamaica's policy in order to address the issues which come up in the course of the conference. Any questions?
I'm Iran in the Atomic Energy Commission. So you say you have to talk about the relevance of the topic.
My condolences first. My condolences first.
Thank
Go ahead.
So I have to talk about the relevance of the topic, which is nuclear security. How am I supposed to talk about that without violating my agenda, because my country does not believe in nuclear security?
Your country is probably the only country which believes in nuclear security, because you're talking about enriching weapons grade uranium and you still talk about them being secure. So ideally you will need to focus upon the issue as to why Iran has equal rights as all the other countries in the world in order to enrich uranium for peaceful purposes. The official stance of the government of Iran is that you're enriching uranium only for civilian purposes, only to generate electricity, power, etc. And the concerns of the world is that, one, the enriched uranium may be falling into hands of forces which are not very feasible and which are not very acceptable to the international society, and two, the government might itself use such enriched uranium in order to produce nuclear weapons. So you need to defend this point of the government that whatever we are intending to do with respect to our nuclear program would be absolutely safe and secure, and such a right should be given to majority of the countries which can prove that such uranium after enrichment would be in safe and secure hands. So if you work on this line of action, then you'll be able to see what we are trying to propose from the side of Iran in the conference. We would come to...
My committee is human rights. My committee. My committee.
My committee is Human Rights Council and I'm a delegate of Israel.
Okay.
So, for the topic, do I also comment on how the use of chemical weapons is affecting my country and my people? Because Israel and Syria are neighbors, so it does affect my country in a way.
True. You are bringing in the, in very technical international law terms, we call it causing least harm despite any activity within your region at a transnational level. Okay? So it's called the transnational or rather transboundary harm should not be caused. You are allowed to enjoy your natural resources within your domain, within your country in the best way possible. You are allowed to do whatever you wish to do within your country without harming your neighbors. So if the acts of Syria is affecting Israel, you can definitely bring that up in your council. A very important example is that of 1991 Gulf War. Prior to this, there were the attacks on the Kurdish villages by Saddam Hussein. 70,000 people were gassed to death. And this kind of a chemical gas, which was used in order to kill the people, affected the neighboring country of Iran. And that was another reason why the Iran-Iraq war took place, followed by the Gulf War of 1991. So such a situation could definitely be brought into the Human Rights Council.
Thank you.
It's affecting the human rights of your country, population. We'll come to you. Please go ahead.
I'm representing Indonesia in the Science and Technology, Committee for Science and Technology for Development.
Okay, UNCSTV?
Yeah. So currently my agenda is Science and Technology for Development. And when you look up about Indonesia, it's in a pretty sorry state. What I do not have is pretty much any development in science. What I want is from the other countries. So if I want to go about asking other countries for help, how do I go about trying and showing that my country, which is currently being faced by a lot of problems by the US and the UK, because they come from fisheries. For fisheries, they are trying to fish for food near my country. I am in the near the ring of fire. So pretty much my country has a lot of problems that it's facing from the other countries too. So if I want to speak about science and technology for development of my own country, and let's say I want help from the others, so do I put forth my state or my condition currently and then propose that I ask for help from the other countries, right? So how do I go about it?
Okay, allow me to make your question as a more general comment first and then come into the specifics. Her question is, if me or if I represent a country which needs support and aid from any other country in whatever form, it could be in terms of technology, it could be in terms of funds, it could be in terms of research help, it could be military support, it could be anything. So if I'm a country who is not in a position to put forth that bargain to the other country, then how do I get such support? Question 1. So tell me something, why would any other country who is in a better state than yours would want to help a country like yours? Is there a reason? Or could there be a reason? Yes?
To establish better relations.
To establish better relations, what do they get out of those relations?
Say my country is...
Don't take specific examples, just in general.
Maybe it's like rich in natural resources which that country lacks. So...
Natural resources which that country lacks. So it could be a mutually acceptable deal to both countries. That fine, if I provide you with the support for so and so, you provide me with trade relations or trade incentives, or it could be free trade, free tariffs, anything of that nature. Number 1. It could be to establish its presence in that zone. So if you want the United States of America to come to Indonesia and establish or rather help you in the development of science and technology, US would be able to send in, or the US would want to send in its own researchers, technicians, etc. to your country, also provide the fund, and in return you either offer trade incentives to the persons of US, or you can help lax the visa regulations with your country in order to allow US citizens, which is most commonly done, and at the same time US has a presence in your country even if it is in the form of civilians. So it is in a way expansion of that country's motives through its populace. Even if it is not military in nature, it's still an expansion of the culture as such, which is always one of the underlying reasons. Secondly, it could always be the pressure of the public at large, or what we call the public opinion. So when a country goes ahead to support another country with respect to any measures which are required, it could also be a step to make good public opinion formulated within the course of politics. Now, why is this important? You might think that, so fine, if there is good public opinion which is generated in other countries, what is my country benefiting from it, or what is the superior state gaining from it? In international politics, generating or establishing a world public opinion is very important in the long run. So in order to first put forth any other deals to try to gain anything from any other country, I might first need to create that image of my country before the entire world. And that is what we call as positive public opinion in political science. So once you have positive public opinion formulated, then it would be easier for your country to get access to various different countries, their resources, their technology, their military, it could be anything. It could be any kind of support. So first think of it as to what your country can offer. If your country can offer nothing, then try to establish an alliance wherein you are able to support the policies of that country. If you are unable to do so, then the best place to go with your request for funds and systematic assistance would be the unbiased institutions of World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, which can help you with funds towards your projects. And with respect to technicians and technical support, you can always approach any other country which is able to provide it to you without many conditions. within your region. There could be regional reasons to give such incentives.
You said that...
Could you be just a bit louder? I'm very sorry, I'll come back to you.
You said that in the case of funds, we could approach the IMF or the World Bank.
True.
But in both these organizations, US is a major player. So in case of countries like suppose Iran, which have like a hostile relation, somewhat hostile relation with US, and in such cases, if we need funds or support, then what? In that case, what are we supposed to do?
The World Bank and International Monetary Fund are not, to the best of my knowledge, US biased institutions.
They're not, but US is a key player in that.
US is a key player. World Bank and IMF have a very different model of voting. It's called the power protection model. The power protection model ensures that there is no one vote per person, and secondly, if your country is powerful, you have a lesser voting power. If your country is not very powerful, you have a greater voting power. In that case, the balance of power is maintained in such an organization. Here, the plenary sessions, or rather the collective representative sessions of these organizations happen on very broad topics and nothing to do with individual countries' funding. The final recommendation, which is sought for taking support, for giving support to any other country for their projects and considerations, it is consistent of the International Monetary and Financial Council or Committee, which is called as the IMFC, which deals with this. It's a 26-member committee, and this committee has representation of many non-aligned states, and therefore that balance of power is maintained and US does not become the key lobbyist in such an organization. And that's why you would notice that World Bank and IMF is successfully funding a lot of projects in various countries which are not even allies of US. So, yes.
Also, if suppose a country has to approach another country and for loans, and if suppose that country rejects a loan, on the governmental basis it rejects the loan, so is it allowed for the approaching country to approach a private investor from the other country?
This is something which is dealing with the trade law of that other country where such a private entity is situated, and therefore it will become, this answer will become very specific to the country which you have mentioned, and there is no broad open answer to it. It may not be. Right?
My organization is the World Health Association.
The World Health Assembly of the World Health Organization.
Yeah.
Right.
So, and the agenda is promoting system of universal health coverage. So, am I supposed to talk about the health issues in my country and their solutions? So, could you please elaborate on the agenda?
Right. When you're dealing with universal health coverage, you need to understand what is the universal health coverage, or what is the system of universal health coverage, what should not be called as universal health coverage, etc. Universal health coverage is a very basic system wherein the citizens of the country are paying a particular amount of tax towards the government. The government takes a part of this tax and invests it towards healthcare, which in the recent days, the entire concept of Obamacare coming up in US at this moment, and at the same time even the Indian government is trying to bring up the National Health Act. The universal health coverage is nothing but a person approaches a hospital, it could be government, it could be private, it could be anybody, or a doctor to get himself cured. The doctor prescribes him with the right treatment, and accordingly the person gets the treatment free of cost. How the doctor gets paid? The doctor sends this copy of the prescription to the government agency which is responsible in order to get his payment. Where does the money come from? Taxes and other sources of the government budget. This is universal healthcare. But at the same time, at that instant position of need, the person gets the healthcare free of cost. This is universal healthcare. Now, how would your country go ahead to establish such a system of universal healthcare or is it even possible or not possible to establish UHC in your country, is something which you need to look upon, and research is required on that. We'll come back to the lady over here, and then we'll come back to the rows in the front.
I'm in the counter-terrorism committee and I'm representing Pakistan. So, how do I defend myself when country is pointing fingers at me?
How do you defend yourself? How has Pakistan defended itself until now?
Denial, but what do I do when they actually cite events that have happened?
As precedent stands, as we can see, Pakistan has very well defended itself in the past, keeps defending itself even now, and still receives billions of dollars from US as aid. So, I would like to know it from you, how do you do it?
Actually, that's
So, exactly. So, go to the website of the Pakistani government. For every action, they have an equal and more than equal reaction. Right? And it's always opposite. So, technically, I'll just give you a very basic example. On 26/11/2008, when the attacks happened in Mumbai, they turned, the Pakistani media and the government turned this entire event into a conspiracy theory which was formulated by the Indian government in order to get the 3 police officers killed at CST. Their reason was that the extremist groups in our country, right-wing extremist groups, they named them as BJP and RSS. Persons from those organizations were the ones who have committed offences related to terrorism in various parts and against the Muslim community as such. And these 3 police officers were investigating those terrorism crimes or acts of terrorism as such. And in order to take these 3 people out of line so that no investigation goes ahead, the Indian government came up with this beautiful plan, brought these Indian-born terrorists into these places as Najmun House and Taj, etc., and led to this beautiful orchestration of the 26/11 attacks. And plausibly, majority of their country believed it.
So technically I'm supposed to make up stories to the best of my imagination.
You will not need to make out stories because half of them are already present. So go ahead and dig up those explanations and reasons and those statements which your government has actually given. And trust me, there is no lack of it.
Okay, just one more thing, but
Pakistan's word, I'll tell you the exact words in their UN statements, have always been, don't treat us as perpetrators of terrorism or anti-disarmament policies. We are partners in your work against terrorism and disarmament.
Okay.
So, from this itself, you will understand as to various policies which the country has come up, and there is no lack of it, trust me. You just need the ideal research.
Can I ask something else?
Sure.
Okay, but what if they counteract with actual facts? I mean, I can't tell them that, it didn't actually happen and Pakistan wasn't there that time.
Okay. Again, represent what your government says and not what the reality may be. Because for you, who is representing your government, what your government has put forth to the world is the ultimate sole reality which cannot be questioned. So even if we found Pakistani soldiers going and attacking a particular, let's say, border point on the LOC, okay, identity has been established, you can say that's perpetrated by the Indian government and the persons are of Indian origin, the I-card may be Pakistani, it could be forged, it could be anything. But the government, see, now you are taking a hypothetical situation. When you come to the actual agenda of your council, or whatever it is dealing with, you will find that there have been plausible statements made by Pakistan and very good, productive strategies have been suggested as well. So bring them up in the council and you will be appreciated. Yes, go ahead.
How much time will be allotted to us so that we can speak accordingly to the research?
You're going into the procedural aspect. which I might be dealing with in the next session, which I will be dealing with in the next session, but just for your curiosity, it should be nothing less than 2 minutes that you're allowed to speak. Yes, many of you might think that 2 minutes is less. In general, Model UN conferences have a time limit of around 30 or 45 seconds. So, extending it to 2 minutes itself is a big leap that we have taken. We understand that delegates at the UN are given much more time than this, but since it's a 2-day conference and we would want every delegate in the committee to have their say and deliberations go on in that manner, once we have had each delegate speak in the committee, we may wish to extend the time. And being a diplomat of your committee, you can do it by your own suggestion. Only thing that you would require is that other delegates in the committee should support you for that. Mayur? We'll require somebody to ask questions this side now. Here. Delegate of Oman.
I'm a delegate of Oman, and my committee is WHA. Our agenda is promoting system of universal health coverage.
Go ahead.
Oman has a very large expatriate population. So do I deal with only what Oman does for the Omani citizens or even the expatriate?
You can see, when you're talking about the universal healthcare system at a forum of World Health Organization, you should be able to suggest whether it is a plausible idea to bring such a system in any country or not. Primarily focus as to if it is possible in Oman, and if yes, what are we doing for it? If no, why we think this should not be done? And if you are doing it for your country's citizens, then in that case, you can help the other countries in understanding how you are doing it and what techniques and model that they can learn and adopt from your technique of doing it and suggesting or formulating within your own country. So focus firstly on your country and then go ahead to say if you require this system in other parts of the world as well. Here. Dissect Sri Lanka, your topic is relating to
the united action towards the total elimination of nuclear weapons.
Right.
So then, should I focus on opposing other countries or defending? Because Sri Lanka is very committed to the non-usage of nuclear weapons, and then it's following NPT and all those treaties. So then, should I focus on the...
What do you think you should be doing?
Opposing Iran?
See, you're asking me a very specific question regarding your country's policies and international relations, which it would not be fair for me to answer here. Or anyway, you need to go back on your research and see whether it would be acceptable to your government in order to do whatever you wish to do. If your country has had such relations against Iran, then go ahead do it. India is also very committed towards the non-usage of nuclear weapons, but it never goes outrightly to say that Iran should do this or Iran shouldn't do this. We always maintain a very subtle policy. So you need to realize by yourself if, and through your country's policies, if something of that nature is acceptable or not. And I'm sorry, I cannot help you with that. Yes.
What do I do if my country doesn't have any strong opinions on the agenda?
Okay, what do you do if your country has nothing to do with the agenda? True? There is a lot of times you have, for example, Haiti in a committee like DISEC talking about nuclear weapons. Talk about relevance, Haiti would not understand by itself. But there is always a scope to voice your opinion. Your, in the sense, your country's opinion. Your country may not have any direct relation to it, but at the same time, Your country may have international obligations wherein you are prohibited to develop nuclear weapons ever in your existence. How you are going to find that out? See to it that you research on the various treaties that your country has signed and ratified. Okay? Signature is something that, see, what is a treaty? If you all know what is a treaty, how many of you know what is a treaty? Raise your hands with caution, I'm going to ask you questions. Thank you, that's better. Treaty is nothing but an international agreement. Okay? It could be between two countries or more than two countries, it could be between the entire world itself. As such, the UN Charter is nothing but a very well successfully drafted treaty which has entered into force and currently established as an organization. Alright? Now, a treaty gives out in it, as part of it, the various clauses which deal with rights and obligations of countries, and at the same time highlights on particular points of agreement between those two countries or the member countries which sign such a treaty. Now, if you need to accept such a treaty as the law of your country, what you need to do is you have to first sign that treaty and then you have to ratify that treaty. What is the meaning of ratification? When you bring such a treaty as a law of your own country, that process is called ratification. Okay? So, for ratification, the first step is always signature. Signature means, okay, I agree to the terms of this treaty, I agree with the essence, the objective of this treaty, but right now I am not making this the law of my land. Okay, this is signature. What is ratification? I am in agreement with the object, I am in agreement with the purpose of the treaty, and at the same time, I wish to make a legislation in my country to make this treaty a law of my land. Okay? And what is accession? Accession is the moment such a country which accedes, signs a treaty, it becomes the law of the land by default. Let me give you an example. Now, when you're talking about the nuclear non-proliferation treaty, if your country has ratified that treaty, your country has also written a law and brought it into force in your country to make the parts of nuclear non-proliferation treaty as law of your own land. Okay? If your country has acceded to the nuclear non-proliferation treaty, then they have not written a separate law, but they consider the treaty itself as the law. Okay? They have not written something down separately and brought it into force, but they consider the treaty itself as the law of the land. Alright? So these are three simple things you need to understand, the difference between signature, ratification and accession. Now, when you are a country which does not have any open policy regarding a particular topic, then you need to first see that are there any treaties that deal with this topic? If yes, has my country signed it, ratified it or acceded to it? If yes, then your country is in support of every positive action that could be taken to solve that situation. And therefore, your policy, what you say in the committee, should be in line with your international obligations in those treaties. Okay? Then you move on to see that who are your allies, and whatever you say in your committee should not go against your allies. Alright? Once you find that, you will be in a better position to appreciate what are your country's obligations and how you will be dealing with them. And with that, we would have just two final questions for the day, and the ones who may not be able to ask their question today can always send me an email, and I love to write long replies back. So you can definitely approach me after the event as well, where I can address you. We will take a question from far end corner over there. Raise their hand.
The thing is that I am supposed to talk about counter-terrorism about Pakistan. So,
people. What's so funny? Counter-terrorism in Pakistan, that's right. What's so funny about it? No question is stupid as such. Could you repeat your question for me to understand better?
Terrorism about Pakistan, for Pakistan.
Okay, what is the country that you are representing?
Pakistan.
In which committee?
CNTCT, 1540.
1540. So what is the agenda of your committee? What is the topic that you are going to discuss? The 1540 committee would be discussing non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. That is the only topic which the 1540 committee ever discusses in its past 50 years of existence. So, being Pakistan, you will have to present Pakistan's views and opinions with respect to non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. Do remember that Pakistan and India are one of the very few countries, or two of the very few countries, who have not yet ratified or signed this nuclear non-proliferation treaty. Therefore, they have no obligation whatsoever, and they can, trust me, develop nuclear weapons at any point in time. They have not signed it because India considers Pakistan as threat, and Pakistan considers India as threat, and both countries want to sign and ratify the NPT on the same day, sitting on the same table, which is never going to happen. So, have this in mind, research accordingly, and present your views. If you need any help, shoot a mail to us and we'll be happy to reply back. Okay? We'll take 2 more questions. And we will take it from people who have never spoken today. So the ones who have spoken with a good conscience, please put your hand down. Okay. From there, yes.
What's the main difference between a treaty and a charter?
A treaty and a charter?
Yeah.
A charter is essentially a more theoretical document. A charter is essentially something which brings out the structure and composition of any organization and lays down the rights and the imposing powers and functions of any particular objective which comes out of such a charter. So therefore you will notice that you will have something called a Charter of Patients' Rights, a charter of an organization. A charter is basically an open declaration in an authoritative form which deals with the ideals of that profession, that entity, that organization, or that group of individuals as such. And a treaty is an international contract. It's an agreement. I agree to do this, you agree to do this in return, and these are the common principles that we believe in, and this is how we are going to execute it. This is a treaty. Alright? And charter in these days does not require any country to ratify it. By signature itself, you consider the charter to be not a law of your land, but to be adopted and agreed upon. Right? If you wish to read up more, look into the International Law Commission's website regarding the difference between a treaty, a covenant, a convention, and a charter. Okay? And these are all forms of international agreements in some way or the other. Very minute differences in formality. And today's session may not be the ideal time where I could make justice to such a topic. Right? Yeah.
Can I oppose a country, like sort of by taking their name? Can I just oppose? Because if it's supporting my country by opposing, then sort of...
Sure. You can do it if your country has done it in the past.
No, actually.
Will it spoil your country's relation with that country if you oppose it? It will. Will your government be fine with that? Read up, research, right?
And do you need a document of the source from where I've taken the information or anything?
As such, we will not require it because your voting records are there with us. Every country, see, as I told you, these topics which you are going to discuss have already been discussed at the UN. So therefore, any resolution which has come up on these topics, we have the voting records for them. So we will know that your country has either supported it or opposed it, and with which countries it has come together to draft such a resolution. So we'll be having a list of your allies and the countries which you don't work with. And that's why any policy change will be notified to us and will be notified us. Right? Any last one question from you? Have you asked a question before? Yes? You have. Any other person who has a question has not never asked it before? There. You missed it by a second.
Yeah, so I'm part of the UNFCCC COP, and our agenda is gender and climate change. So could you tell me what exactly is the connection between the two?
Gender and climate change. That's a very interesting question actually to end it with. Now, gender and climate change, what do you understand by gender? See, these are topics, honestly, the entire concept of gender as such is a very mature topic to deal with. In order to understand gender, you need to go into understanding whether gender is a social construct or is it your biological structure.
Social construct.
It is a social construct. An open question to everyone. When I say I'm a male, is that my gender or is that my sex? Exactly. So what is my gender?
That depends on you.
True. So I would like to associate myself. She's right. She's absolutely right. That it depends on me and my upbringing as to what my gender is. My gender is masculine. I could be a male and at the same time have gender which is feminine. So these are the issues that ideally gender, feminism and human rights deal with. Okay? And when you're talking about gender and climate change in terms of the UN and your committee, you have to examine that what is the role that gender equality as such plays in the topic or issue of climate change. Now, up to what extent have gender movements changed the scenario of decision-making processes at the level of climate change? And this has happened at a mass scale during the 1990s and the years to come. So your research on that needs to go into much depth, and I would suggest you research from Amnesty's website for that purpose.
Thank you.
Alright? So any further questions, I would take them after the session is over on a one-to-one basis, and you can always send me an email. My email ID, if you could please note down for official purposes, it's Secretary General, SECRETARY dot Pune Model UN, PUNEMODEL UN @ your favorite website, gmail.com. Oh, I wouldn't want to listen to those favorite websites actually. Any further clarification regarding, I'm not asking about questions related to your substantive topic, but any clarification that you wish to make regarding the next event that is going to happen on the 14th. 14th is very important. If your peers have not appeared today, then please inform them that 14th is going to be a session regarding the procedure of the conference. Today we have dealt with regarding your understanding of the UN, in what backdrop do you have to place yourself in order to come in as a delegate of your country, followed by how you can go about your research, your role realization, and how to best represent your country in the forum that you are representing in. Alright? And on 14th we will be discussing as to what would be the procedure we will follow in order to represent you in that committee. Okay? And I hand over the mic to Mayur. Please go ahead and end the session as you wish.
Alright delegates, my one and only question to you, was this session boring? No! I can't hear you, I'm sorry, I'm a listening problem. So can we have a bigger round of applause for this month today? Alright, so For those of you who've not got any writing material for today, please make sure the next time you do have something wherein you can note down all the points that he will be giving, and it'll be a lot of that when it comes to the procedure, because we are making special handouts. It's not me, it's him who's making special handouts for each and every committee when it comes to the procedure.
Allow me to interrupt you at that point. We are in the process of making the handouts for the procedure of the UN, and once that is prepared, we will be sending it out to you. Most probably, the handouts will be ready before your next session so that you can bring those handouts in order to understand the procedure. Next session, one thing which we compulsorily require is the Charter of the UN to be with you. Okay? It could be in any form, it could be in your iPads, iPods, or whatever devices you wish to bring in. That's fine, electronic devices are fine with us. Charter of the United Nations is important. Mayur, I'll send you the copy tonight. Please mail it across to everyone. And the procedural handbook which we will be circulating, which is also the handout that we're talking about, that will be out by the 14th. As the practice in the UN goes, all diplomats receive their background guide, what is called as the agenda introductory. That is received by all the delegates 1 week before the session. But since we are simulating the conference here, you might require greater knowledge on the topic. We will send it out to you at least 2 weeks before the conference. Okay? So generally, if you find any of your friends saying that study guides come up 2 months before the conference, sorry, those are research materials. We will send you actual introductory guides for your topic, which we will receive 2 weeks before. Before that, take my help if you require through my email regarding research. I'll be there for you. Okay? Sorry.
And did you all have any problem locating this particular auditorium? Yes? Alright. So that's why please use the map that was provided in the email. Please, and this will be the auditorium for the 14th of December and the 17th of January, which will be the opening ceremony for the Pune Model United Nations, which is mandatory for each and every delegate to attend. And parents are always welcomed if in case they wish to accompany their children. And the sessions will be held on the other side of this campus, which is on the other side of the road. Alright? So again, we will be sending you all the details via email and maps. So please don't worry about anything. If in case you have any queries, I'm sure all of you have my number. Please feel free to contact me. And anything related to substantive content, any queries with respect to your research, he is the man, not me. I know nothing about the UN. Alright? So, hope to see you all on the 14th. If in case you all have missed any part of today's session, we will be sending the video probably by tonight if in case we are able to upload it. And you all can go through the videos repeated number of times as well.
Guys, just tell me if you require me to change my process of the discourse in any way possible. Are there any suggestions that you wish to make? In the way I am delivering these sessions to you, are there any suggestions that you would like to make? Is there any improvement that I can make on my part? Because I'm a human being and there is always scope for improvement. Okay, that's a lie. No one? That's a lie. Yes.
Can you have a board of some sort so you can write all the email IDs or whatever website you do, so that if we miss it, you can write it there?
Sure. In that case, I would make a note of the important points which I have delivered today, and I'll send it across to Mayur. Mayur can deliver it to you all. And from next time onwards, we'll anyway have a PowerPoint representation on 14th. So we will be incorporating that. A board may not be possible because it is not very, it couldn't be read by people who are sitting right at the end. So we will try to incorporate PowerPoint presentation on the next day. Thank you so much. Anybody else? Here.
While you're giving important points, can you please be a little slow, because while we have to write, it's very difficult to get everything.
Thank you so much, and at the same time I would also expect you to stop me wherever I'm going fast and just say that, you know what, you're not audible right now or whatever, I'm unable to understand. It's fine. I'm ready to stop because nobody said anything, I thought, okay, maybe this place is alright. So I'll definitely look into that from next time. And please, you guys also stop me and say, hey, repeat that. Anything else? Go ahead.
It's not a suggestion related to the MUN, it's just that in the next conference, could you please reduce the power of the air conditioner because we all
Honorable Director, College of Engineering, Pune, please take it.
Alright, we'll make sure that's in place next time. Thank you all for being here for today's training session. For those who have not come, it's their loss. I'm really sad for them. And I hope to see you all again on the 14th of December, that's next Saturday. Yes? I can't hear you. Thank you so much.